Hey everybody, and welcome to Notes from the Underground. This is a podcast for people who love Jesus but have some questions about Christianity. Here at Notes, we take a microscope to some of Christianity's thornier topics and people, using a progressive theological lens and a socio-historical approach to studying the Bible. So if that sounds like you, come on in and have a seat. But buckle up, it might get bumpy. Well, welcome back, folks, to Notes from the Underground. I'm your host, Tiziana Mom So Hard Severse.
What does the Mom So Hard say today?
If your little friend shipped off a bridge, would you?
That's a good.
Yeah, I like the eat your broccoli one. That was a good one.
Yeah, the
Which
eat
one
your
was?
broccoli.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was a good one. Behind the glass, Rocket Man Andy Bishop. And
Very solemn episode, everyone.
And I'm Rick.
Welch. I'm Rick Welch.
That's my middle name now.
That's it.
I should have never said that. That's going to carry for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I'm having a good time watching Gregula over there play with this Andy's cat. It's no longer a kitten. It's a cat now.
Well, he's like a, he's like a
teen?
older boy, young teen, maybe.
Yeah. He's a teen. It's fun to watch him in there. Andy will stand up sometimes and Greg will literally climb his pants.
Climb me. Pardon my
cute.
French.
So cute. He's a serious little fella. And you've got your little dog back there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's Fancy. She's a foster. She's not ours.
Fancy?
Fancy.
Here's
That's
your
what.
one chance, Fancy. Don't let me
Oh,
down.
yeah, exactly.
Is that the Reba,
Reba,
song?
yeah.
Okay, so
Here's your one
I
chance,
don't
Fancy,
know that
don't let
song,
me
but
down.
she is named for that song. This Fancy's the name Kristen gave her when she arrived here without a name.
Oh.
She has a very bad skin condition. She's a hairless Chinese crested with pretty bad skin. So we're trying to get her skin straight. She needs to go back to the vet. She's better than she was, which is crazy because she's not very good.
Yeah.
But improved anyways. And she's very sweet, if largely flavorless. Very expensive dogs, though.
Yeah.
Those Chinese crested things, they're like a lot of money.
Yeah, and it's surprising that one would find its way into a shelter, considering that. The fact
Our
that they're so
literal
expensive.
guess is that she's kind of a used up redneck breeding dog.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh my. That is either heartburn, or rage. I can't tell. That just like swelled up from my pregnant belly.
Yeah, that's
Like,
gosh.
because like right now, like you don't know. Like I went to the fair. I took my daughter to the fair.
uh-huh.
And, she's only 2, so there's only so much she can do at the fair, exactly, right? But the animals she was super into. And, like, every time we would, like, get to
I still am.
Oh, who isn't, right? Like, but every time we get to the end, she'd be like, more animals. We'd have to, like, loop around and go again. And I'm not even kidding. There were several mammals, female mammals, because you can see on the things, that would get up to the gate and start sniffing my belly. Like,
They knew.
Yeah, every mammal knows pregnant. Every mother knows pregnant.
That's funny. I mean,
And
yeah,
just
it
the
kinda makes sense, I guess.
thought, just the sentence, some redneck breeding dog, like as a pregnant mom right now, like just makes like every feeling of like
Aw.
solidarity with every living thing that's gone through this.
For the record,
Like,
I'm
well
not
up.
saying the dog's a redneck.
No, I know. No, what I mean is like, I just like,
Yeah.
there's certain things. There are certain things that happen to minority people that even if it like that all like when a minority person sees it goes, I know that. There
Yeah.
are certain things that happen to women that I see it no matter what their species is, right? Like I see it, I'm like, I know that.
Yeah.
I know that. And like just that thought, that poor little dog, I want to adopt Fancy. She's pretty rough looking.
She's
Yeah.
rough.
I will say.
Well, Chinese crested on a good day is an
Yeah.
ugly dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to pet her, but I was like, is it contagious?
I had a,
No, it's not contagious, but it is like petting a plucked chicken.
It's exactly what it's like. It's exactly what it's like.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's like.
That's funny.
All right. Well, so
Listen, I didn't bring a joke last time. I didn't
no,
bring a
you
joke.
didn't. I
but
was extremely disappointed.
So I brought a
Just
dirty joke.
frankly.
I'm just
Ooh.
kidding. It's not dirty. I'm just kidding. But it
I'm
is
the
hilarious.
worst. I'm like, yes.
Dirty? Bring it to the Bible study.
worst.
So
Yeah.
I haven't done a Larry the 15th Apostle joke in a while.
No, it's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a minute. So
Okay.
So this woman dies. She goes to the pearly gates, and Larry the 15th apostle is sitting there. And she walks up and she says, "This is amazing. I didn't know that I could, just that I was going to make it here." He's like, "You haven't actually made it here yet." He's like, "You have to answer one question. If you get the question right, we'll let you in. It's real simple." She was like, "Okay, so what's the question?" He says, "What is Easter?" So she says, "Okay, Easter is an important holiday in the Christian faith. You see, after Jesus was crucified, he was laid in his tomb, and a stone was placed across the entrance. But 3 days later, Mary Magdalene came to anoint his body for burial, and lo, the stone had been rolled away, and the tomb was empty. And an angel told her." So she goes on for like this for minutes.
Yeah.
She's quoting chapters
Yeah.
and verses. She's analyzing all the pagan influences on the modern holiday, everything you could possibly want to know about Easter, right? So Larry is astounded. And she's clearly very knowledgeable. And while she's giving this lecture, he takes out the golden key from his angel toga, and he puts the key in the lock, and he turns the key, and the girl says, "But wait, I'm not finished. I have one more important point. Every year, the stone of his tomb is rolled away, and Jesus comes out, and if he sees his shadow, there are 6 more weeks of winter." Boom, she went to purgatory.
She went there like, "You're out of here. You're out of here." That's a good one.
I just liked it because it had Mary Magdalene's name in it.
I liked it. Well, I mean, because again, that's what we've been talking about. The
That's
fact
right.
that she was so prominent and such an important person in the movement that all 4 gospels attest to the fact that she was the first person there at the tomb and the first person to witness his resurrection. Although, except Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that the one?
Mark different.
Yeah. Well, there's one of them that says like these women were there and doesn't necessarily like.
It's Mark chapter 9. After the 8 verses, there's a belief in earlier versions from if that's what you're going
yes,
after.
that's the one.
Yeah.
Where he like appears to some dudes walking along and like that's the one, that's who he appears to. But I don't think that the 4 versions of the resurrection.
You're talking about the disciples on the Emmaus Road.
Yeah.
You're talking about the Emmaus Road.
Yeah, there's one like
That's
I almost what is that? What is that?
That's Matthew. But if you do Emmaus, Emmaus, that'll take you right to it. So I was talking about how Mark, supposedly some earlier manuscripts didn't have verses 9 through the rest of the chapter. And that's when it's in verse 9 actually mentions Mary Magdalene. Remember, I told you that once before. I said in verse 8, it says, "And they were afraid and they said nothing."
Yeah.
The end. Like, I liked that ending. I thought, wow, that's a great way to end that story,
So that's Luke. It says it's Luke, actually.
For the Emmaus Road?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where it's like, it doesn't necessarily say, that he appeared to, the women. It doesn't say anything about that. And it says that, it just says, heroes or whatever. We'd have to go read it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter.
I agree with Rick though that the they were afraid. The
end.
Yeah.
And, yeah. Go and tell. And it's like, I'm not telling squat.
Are you crazy? Go and tell him what? That a guy just rose from the dead?
So this is a really interesting. So during my research on Mary, right? Like, so this is an interesting place to start to pick up our discussion.
Okay.
Right. The 12 were like terrified and they're hiding in they're hiding up in the upper room.
Right.
Right. So 2 things. Number 1, the 12 were just a part of the posse that followed Jesus. For example, when he sends out the 70 in Luke, he sends out 70 people to go out in pairs. And they go out and they do, it's that Luke 10. And they go out and they're like, "Lord, even the demons are submitting to us in your name." And he's like, "That's great, but don't rejoice that demons are submitting to you. Rejoice that your names are written in the book of life," right?
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus had a lot of people that were a part of his ministry that had power to do what he was doing because of their faith in him and in what he was saying that they were, which were he was the first fruits of this relationship with God that all of us were destined to have if we just chose to accept it, right? That we all have Jesus's power. He's like, don't be that impressed by it.
Mm-hmm.
That was 70 people. So when we think about Jesus and we think about the depictions of Jesus, like when I say depictions, I mean pictorial. And I mean like when we watch movies and stuff, you always see Jesus like chilling with 12 dudes. That's not entirely correct. Like he had a lot of people
That's right.
that were invested in his movement.
Yep.
However,
It probably takes a few people to get remembered for 2,000 plus years.
Yeah.
Well, so there's a difference though. So one of the things that someone mentioned in my reading, I guess it probably was Bruce Chilton too, who, like I said, one super fan of the way that he was sort of filling in the blanks in terms of Mary's character and stuff. But he did say this really cool thing that I was like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. He was talking about the political environment when Jesus started his ministry.
Mhm.
John had just got his head chopped off
Right.
for preaching a gospel other than the one that was being perpetuated by the Pharisees and Sadducees of his day.
For
Right?
the ignorant, you mean the Baptist.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist,
Okay.
yeah. So Herod was the king of the Jews, right, at the time of Jesus' ministry.
Yes.
He was a puppet king installed by the Roman government
Yep.
because he was more invested in the prestige that being in this position got him. And he was kind of like, when we see Herod for the most part, like at the end of Jesus's ministry, he's often depicted as just kind of like a wild, rotten, lascivious, kind of like, I always think of him as like Joaquin Phoenix's character in Gladiator.
Yeah.
Like that's how Herod is
see
always
him-
depicted in my brain.
I always saw him as. Have you ever seen Braveheart?
Yeah.
Do you remember like the lover, the one lover of the prince, of the daughter of Edward Longshanks? He was sort of like, sorry, if you ever look at him, he acts like he's brave, and he seems like, in other words, he's following this role. He's got the dress, he's got the palace, he's got all the things,
Yeah.
but he lacks any ability whatsoever to be a king.
See, and the thing is, like, I think about the fact that, Herod's this king, and when Salome does the little dance, right?
Mhm,
And he's
yeah.
like, what do you want? Up to half my kingdom. And her mom, who's all mad because John's been pointing a finger at her relationship because there was some weird incestuous stuff going on in Herod's court.
Yep.
And she's like, I want to head John the Baptist. And Herod's like, damn it.
That's not what I.
I don't want to do that.
That's
I don't
not
want to
what
do
I was
that.
asking.
But he didn't have power to say no to a 16-year-old girl. Get out of here. What is wrong with you? Who's in charge of this country, sir?
Yeah.
So like so I always think of him as like a cross between the hedonist robot in
Oh my God.
Futurama and Joaquin Phoenix's character in Gladiator. Just
wow.
like
Yeah.
unfit, not a competent leader, but still has to answer to Rome,
Yes.
who does not want to continue to see this Jewish uprising that is beginning to brew, which eventually culminates in the horrible destruction of the temple in 70 AD, right? So this is the political environment that Jesus starts his ministry in. Not only is he sort of a bad guy in the terms of the Jewish religious leaders of his day, he's kind of a bad guy in terms of Rome, which makes him a bad guy in terms of Herod,
Mm-hmm.
right? So when Jesus picks 12 very specific disciples and sends them out, y'all, they're decoys.
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 I've never heard this before.
Because I'd never heard it either, but think about it. Because Jesus's ministry contained many people. First of all, we know in Luke 10 that he sent out 70 people in pairs that were doing all this work in his name. But he had these 12 people very specifically, very early on that he says, go out and do these works in my name. Jesus had zero ego.
Yeah.
Jesus was not invested in himself being perpetuated. He was interested in the kingdom of God being perpetuated.
Yes.
He was interested in the truth
I would agree with
of
that.
everyone's personal connection to God and their own right to walk in that power being perpetuated. But he probably didn't want to get killed before he had a chance to do that.
Mhm.
So he picked 12 dudes. He probably picked them Jesus disappeared in a crowd.
Yep.
He probably wasn't a looker.
No.
He probably wasn't very tall.
No.
There was nothing about him that likely stood out. And so he picked 12 guys that were about probably his same age. He was a carpenter. They were all fishermen. They all were kind of probably like a little bit, they all had dad bods, I bet,
Except for the tax collector.
Except for the tax collector.
Yeah.
But we don't know because we don't know. No, this is
probably
me.
looked
This
like
is
him.
me making a leap. This is me making a leap.
Yeah.
But it's possible that the purpose of the disciples specifically was this idea of decoy. If we can send you guys out, and it would confuse the Romans. So they wouldn't exactly know. They would be having conflicting sort of reports
Yeah, 'cause
about
it's not
what
like
Jesus
there'd be
looked
pictures
like.
of him.
Right. There would be like kind of conflicting reports about what he looked like exactly,
Huh,
and like
this is
and
interesting.
more importantly, where he was located. Because if
I
people
kinda
were
buy
going
it,
out,
actually. That's kind of interesting. I
It's
kinda buy
definitely
that.
interesting.
I had never heard this before. But he was so what he's saying is there's a difference between disciples and apostles. There's a difference, and the word there's different language used to describe different people in the Jesus movement, right? So the disciples had a specific function, which was once Jesus was gone, to be the seed that produced the harvest, but while Jesus was alive, to be to disseminate the message in a way that confused the Roman government and made it more difficult to get a finger on Jesus.
That's interesting.
And the reason that this is brought up
Yeah,
is
in a book about
because
Mary Magdalene, I was really curious why.
I'm gonna tie this back in. The reason this is brought up is because what has happened is the 12, based on their gender, have been elevated to a place of importance within the Jesus movement that isn't necessarily deserving. They're not necessarily deserving of.
Okay.
So, but because he chose 12 dudes, it's assumed that only dudes were given the power to participate in the ministry. Only dudes were given the right to be apostles and plant and share. Only men were responsible. And all women did was cook the fish sandwiches and darn their socks.
Yes.
But if we stop and ask ourselves, what was Jesus's political
Did those
maneuver?
dorks wear socks with their sandals?
I mean,
It's possible.
It's possible.
Just kidding.
But you know what I'm saying? So part of the idea here, when we think about the 12 and Jesus's 12 disciples being more of an opportunity to create decoys, then we can start to deconstruct and break down the gender ideology that has been embedded in that belief system, which includes, and therefore only men should have positions of power and responsibility because only men were disciples in Jesus's day.
Mm-hmm.
No, they weren't. There was a large group of people that followed Jesus. The 12 had a very specific function. And that is might be, and what I think is probably part of why they were quaking in their boots.
Yeah.
Because they had been sent out in his name.
Been seen enough.
And they had been seen enough because Jesus was attempting to diffuse and disseminate so that he could have more time to do what he did. And so might be part of why these guys were so terrified.
That would make sense
Genuinely
why the little
interesting.
girl recognized Peter.
Peter, that's right.
I like that. So, Andy, and just so you understand, when Christ is in the middle of all of his trials, Peter and John, technically John, are trying to get in close to see what's going on during these trials. And Peter is hanging out in the court waiting, and people recognize him. Hey, weren't you with the Galilean? Weren't you with the one that's being on trial right now? And he's like, no, he's denying Christ. And so with what you're saying, he would have been recognized because he was that person that had been sent out in these places.
Right.
And they were like, hey, weren't you that guy that was speaking on his name?
Now, there's no way to prove any of it, right? It's an interesting theory.
Speculative.
But so when we think about language and we think about apostles and disciples, the word that's used to describe these women, so let's go back in time a little bit. We know that Mary Magdalene was part of, and not only just part of, but head of. And the reason we know she was the head of is because she's mentioned first every time there's a list.
Every single time.
Every single time there's a list of women, Mary Magdalene is mentioned first. That means that she was in charge of them. That's what that means.
Yep.
So we have this woman who is a head of a list of women. The list of women include other prominent figures of the time, including members of Herod's court, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And
talk about the inside track, baby.
yeah, which we're going to talk about too. But we're going to talk about because patrons and patronage was a big part of Roman culture. Big part of Roman culture.
Right.
The strata of Roman social life was divided in this kind of, you had a caste system, and wealthy patrons were part of the people at the top. Like they were kind of part of this, the system of patronage was part of the Roman social structure.
Okay.
So it was so lots of people had, patrons, people that were lower on the strata had higher people on the strata that were patrons for them. and that would like support them, like artists or whatever, like whatever their social strata is. But then when it came time for like voting and like, political maneuvering, then these like lower people who'd been being supported would support the person higher up.
Yeah.
So it's not really, it's interesting. But so the reason it's interesting that someone from Herod's court was a patron to Jesus is because it would have feigned the idea that as a patron, when it came time to support Herod's right to power, Jesus, because he was being patronized, because he was a lower person who had a patron that was part of Herod's court, when the time came, Jesus would ultimately give his allegiance to this
Theoretically support Herod's
because
claim.
that's how the Roman society was structured. That's how they did things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like wheeling and dealing. Well, it's not that much different from our current system.
No,
Frankly,
it's just
if the lobbyists pay you to fly to France to do a thing, then you're more likely to sign legislation that supports them.
Sure.
That's essentially the system.
Yeah.
So that was the system in Rome. And so that was how that social structure worked. So you have these women. So when you say these women supported his ministry, the question that remains is, what does that word mean? Because the word in Greek is diakonos, which is deacon, which is a word we see repeated often throughout the epistles, and especially in Pauline epistles later, to refer to a process of the Eucharist. And the very early Christian churches, which met in homes and which met in, small intimate settings, these deacons were responsible for the liturgy.
Yeah, so these women that are serving Jesus are literally deacons.
They're literally deacons.
By the word.
By the
Greek
words.
word.
Right. And if we go, well, what does that mean in antiquity? Like, because we don't know exactly what it meant for Jesus' ministry, but we can look at the church that began to develop very shortly after his death, and we can look at the Pauline epistles, and we can say, well, what kind of roles did deacon women have in that regard? And then we can kind of maybe, hopefully, with a degree of certainty, retroactively apply it to these women: Susanna, Salome, Mary Magdalene, and Joanna, right? These mentioned amongst other women.
I just thought of something funny.
Yeah.
So the women were deacons and the men were decoys.
Yes! I'm telling you.
Back to you, sorry.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, I'm sort of theorizing.
It's all speculative. I
It's
get
all
it.
speculative, but it makes a lot of sense because, like, and we look at everything we've talked about in these notes from the underground, way back from John the Baptist, the story of God demanding that women be included in the story of God.
Right. Yeah.
By erasing the men at all
It
from the
makes
birth
total
of John
sense.
the Baptist or Jesus Christ.
It makes total sense. The very thing that was wrong with humanity was that man was alone. That's the thing that was wrong. Like, everything is good except this.
Yeah. And God's like, y'all are mucking it up down here.
Exactly.
Because you have cut out women. You're screwing it up.
Yep.
You're spare parts, bud. Get it together. And and we have examples. We have, him insisting that Mary has a right to learn, refusing to force her to go back to the kitchen, but saying, no, she has an important place here to learn with me, by defending the woman caught in the act of adultery and demanding that the men with stones in their hands prove why they felt they had the right, like what made them so special.
Right.
By demanding that by honoring the woman, the sinful woman who cries and wipes his feet with her tears in her hair, by standing up for her and saying, this woman is so much more loved by me than you because she has proven, when from whom much has been given, much has been forgiven from her.
Yeah.
And so her gratitude and her love for God and her commitment to God far exceeds you, Pharisee.
What about in the Gospel of John, whenever Mary, the sister of Martha, is actually broke the spikenard and put it on Jesus? And what did the men say? You're wasting the money.
He's like, no, she's anointing me.
The poor you'll always have with you, but this woman will never be forgotten. And we still talk about her today.
So
Yeah.
Jesus had this really strong and prominent history of including women. The chances, the likelihood of women being included in the 70 that was sent out, to me, is probably high.
Mhm.
It never says 70 men.
I was getting ready to ask you that question. Do you think that women were part of those disciples?
I do. I very much do. And I think one of the things that...
Which goes against the theory of the decoy.
Well, not necessarily at that point.
Yeah, no, but by the 70.
By the 70, yeah, the 70. I don't see why not.
I don't either.
I don't see why not, especially given the fact that we see so many inscriptions in ancient synagogues and on ancient gravestones and stuff. The gratitude and the elevation of Jewish priestesses, right? So a female bearer of wisdom within the Jewish culture wasn't entirely unheard of, you know? Even though, like I'd said before, women as a general rule were considered so untrustworthy, they weren't even allowed to like testify in court, you know, in terms of like the general culture. But again, you have like people like Deborah, who was a judge, that sort of stand out. So it wasn't unheard of for women to have this level of power. And as a matter of fact, think about Romans, right? The very book of Romans.
I was getting ready to ask you about Greeks. You're talking about the book of
Well,
Romans.
let's talk about this. Okay, so here's where we're at, because I want to at the very end of the book of Romans, right? So Paul sends this letter to the Romans. It's kind of like, I don't think Paul had been to Rome yet. I think Paul was going to go to Rome, and I think that he was kind of like setting the letter in advance, because he keeps saying like, I keep hoping to come to you, and I haven't been able to, blah, blah, blah.
No, he had not been to Rome yet.
Yeah, so he hadn't been to Rome yet, but he wants to go there. At the end, so it's Romans chapter 16, 1 through 25. It's like the closing chapter, the closing, and in conclusion,
Yeah.
he says, I want to thank all these people. It's like at a Grammys, right? Someone gets their award, and then they're like, they say about like, you know, I got here with this, you know, the power of this and that, and I want to thank all these people, right?
Right.
And I start thanking so many people that they play the music and they kick them off stage. Paul does this like enormous, it's like 25 verses of then thank this person and this person and this person, right? He thanks 28 people. 10 of them are women. The first one is Priscilla.
Ah,
The first one.
the wife of Aquila.
Well,
Right.
yeah. Yeah. Well,
Priscilla
you know
and Aquila.
You know what? Let's just read it,
All right.
because I think it's important. Phoebe, excuse me. I lied. This is why you read your Bible, folks.
Get it right, lady.
This is why you read your
Come
Bible.
on.
Because as soon as you said Priscilla and Aquila, I was like, yeah, that's right.
Andy was getting ready to call you out on that one.
Yeah, Andy was like, excuse me, ma'am.
Oh, I have to say on a side note that Andy and I were talking about it today. And I said, remember, Andy, I'm trying to get people to read the Bible and understand it for themselves.
Yeah.
And I said, I said the word you, right? I said the you. And I said, by you, I mean everybody. And so Andy's response was, well, you just bring people in to read it aloud to me all the time. So he's getting plenty of Bible.
Yeah.
He's getting plenty of
Good.
it.
Yeah, he said it in the thing of like, I try to get you to read the Bible. He's like, well, I don't specifically mean you, the general you. And I was like, yeah, no, for me specifically, you have people read.
He's got more Bible than a lot of Christians I know, I promise you right
Isn't
now.
that wonderful?
I've done a lot of learning.
He's
There's
done
been a lot. Andy's learned.
I've done some learning.
I'm gonna make you a little certificate. I'm gonna make you a graduated Sunday school certificate.
Actually,
You know?
it needs to be a Jackass Award. Burroughs.
The Burroughs.
Oh,
It even took me a minute. Don't
Sorry.
forget.
that's okay. Good,
It
thank
took
you.
me a minute.
Yeah,
Everybody's looking at me like, why did you call Andy a jackass?
I know. I was like, oh, rude, sir, rude.
That's
Anyway,
a Burrow award.
so Romans 16.
Yep. Let's hear it.
I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon, and that's that word diakonos,
There it is.
of the church in Cenchreae. I ask you to receive her in the Lord in a way worthy of his people and to give her any help she may need from you, for she has been the benefactor of many people, including me. That's a whole paragraph, y'all. Then he's like, greet Priscilla and Aquila, my co-workers in Christ Jesus. They risked their lives for me. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful to them. Priscilla is mentioned before her husband.
Always.
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 Also greet the church. Now, that is significant. The order of names and the way that the order of names is listed is significant. That's part of the structure of letter writing and communicating value and worth and importance. It's part of it.
Yep.
Greet also the church that meets at their house. Greet my dear friend Epinetus, who was the first convert to Christ in the province of Asia. Greet Mary, who worked hard for you. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my fellow Jews who have been in prison with me. Now, Andronicus and Junia is mentioned second in that regard. Greet Apelles, whose fidelity to Christ, blah, blah, blah. Greet Aristobulus, Herodonian, Narcissus, greet
Narcissus.
Tryphena, Narcissus.
He wasn't saying that Aristobulus was a narcissistic.
I really need to study Greek because I don't half these names. Tryphena and Tryphosa, those women who worked hard in the Lord. So you've got a pair of sisters who are doing this teamwork. Greet Rufus, blah, blah, blah. So everybody else gets like a second, but Phoebe gets a paragraph. Phoebe is the deacon and patron of Paul that has been given the responsibility of delivering this letter to the people of Rome, to the churches of Rome. Not only the church of Rome, but the churches of Rome. So she is a traveling preacher, a traveling pastor, a traveling deacon who is delivering this letter to the people and then staying in their churches. They're receiving her, which means she's then now probably having a meal with them. She's doing all this stuff, she's presiding over the service.
Maybe even known.
And given, and she's been given the responsibility, much like Mary Magdalene was given the responsibility of telling the deacons telling the disciples what Jesus' next move was. She's been given the responsibility of not just handing over this letter, but being Paul's personal spokesman.
Do you know what I'm hearing? They were both successful in their quest because the letter made it to Rome. Yeah. And we got it today.
And we have Phoebe to thank for that.
Yep. And Mary Magdalene did her part.
Yeah.
She got it to the disciples and we hear it today.
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome?
And so
successful in their quest.
So this is really important. She has been the benefactor of many people, including me, a benefactor. Mm-hmm. What?
Yeah, it's not like her husband was the benefactor of many people, including me. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So there are two things we talked about. The structure of society in Rome. You had these social strata where people on the top would be patrons of people that were lower down in an effort to secure their opinion and their vote, so that when push came to shove, if there was going to be some sort of political coup, you would have some support, right?
Okay.
Greek culture was structured. In Greek culture, you had two social realms. You had the oikos and you had the polis. Oikos was the realm of the home, and polis was the realm of the political. So within the oikos, that was like, that was the realm of women. That's where women had control. They had control of the home. They ran the home. They were the financial managers of the home. They were in charge of the slaves. That's what they did. And the men were in charge of like voting. And the men were in charge of all things that were political. And these were the roles that they fulfilled in society. But one of the things that we don't understand about Greek economy and about the Greek structure of the home is that we're not talking about American homes. American families consume. That's what they do. An American family is a consuming unit. A Greek family, a Greek home was a production unit. It was an economy. It made wool. It made wine. It made oil. It made fabric. Think about the Proverbs 31 woman. What does she do? She weaves with her own hand. She produces, she laughs, she's in charge,
woman.
She's a productive. So Greek homes were tiny economies that were designed to sustain all of the people that lived within the home, the children, the slaves, the parents, whatever, extended family members, but then was also designed to have something else to offer outside of that. So women were economic managers of their homes. They were financial managers. They were in charge of these enormous economic,
I was
economic
say
farms.
That wasn't it typical that they would kind of control the finances?
Yeah. Well, because they were in charge of all of it, and husbands, they were in the symposium. They were they were meeting in the streets and
like
voting
Mordecai at
and
the gate.
shit. Yeah. Voting and
I'm busy hoping to influence the kingdom.
And maybe they were merchants, if they were merchants or whatever, they were going down to ships and sending the stuff. So a woman was a household manager in a way that prepared her uniquely to be responsible and in charge of a lot of stuff. And when you're talking about these homes, which is where most of the time the Christian faith and the Christian community was proliferating because it was illegal, the homes were run by women. They were run by women. It was the women who, look at Lydia. Lydia
Yes.
was one of the first people in the book of Acts, that converted her entire household because she was in charge.
Yeah.
Women were in charge of the house.
Isn't she described as the person that sold like fabric?
Yes, purple fabric.
Purple fabric, yeah.
Right. Because the home was not just
She was a production unit.
It was not just a place of consumption. It was a place of production.
Yeah, a maker
and
of
she
purple
was in
fabric.
charge of that.
That's right.
That's
Yep.
exactly right. And so these women had money and they had influence and they had power. If they had husbands, chances are their husbands were didn't bother with it as long as their household was running because that was her job. That wasn't his job.
Right.
His job was politics or his job was being a merchant or whatever.
Right. They didn't need permission.
And what's also interesting is it's not entirely unusual in Greek culture if a husband was missing or gone for extended periods of times or even possibly dead for her to continue on in that role. Think about the Odyssey. The Odyssey, one of the oldest Greek stories that we have, right? Yeah. This guy, Odysseus, goes on this crazy long journey. He's gone for how long? 20 years.
Yep.
That entire time, his wife, who's left at home, Penelope, continues to run the family home. And there's all these suitors that are trying to marry her, but she's like, no, I'm not doing that. She creates this whole thing, right? She's weaving on the loom, and once she finishes looming.
Doesn't she? I believe she loses a lot of her power if she marries. There's some there's also some societal aspect to it.
That's
right?
what I'm saying. Exactly.
Where she's just there ain't nothing in this for me. You don't bring enough to the table.
That's right.
Because she was the manager of her house.
Yeah.
And she was in charge. And she was in charge of the slaves and she was in charge of her children. There's this one snarky verse where her son tells her to go back to her weaving. And she's like, oh, she's like, oh, you're ear toot, little tutor, because she'd been running that for 20 years. She'd been running that household.
Yeah.
And she'd been defending off these men with sticks left and right. You know what I mean? And the reason that Penelope is portrayed that way is because she's an example of a steadfast, straightforward, hardworking, eyes wide open woman that knows how to hold it down and to keep things in check and to not be persuaded when her husband's been gone for 20 years.
So do you think that based on everything you're saying right here, because I'm thinking about Mary Magdalene as that leader.
That's exactly right. So my thoughts are this. Okay. Mary Magdalene comes from, she's a Jewish woman raised in the Jewish town of Magdala. However, it is embedded in the larger Greco-Roman context. Now, keep in mind, there was a period of time where Greece had a heyday, right? And this is BC, I think Greece finally bends the knee to Rome in 162 BCE. Mm-hmm. But before that, Greece was the ruler, especially during the Hellenistic period, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Which is 325 BCE, something like that.
Alexander.
Yeah. Everybody wanted to be these people. They loved Greek culture and Greek society. There's a reason why the Egyptians compiled. That was a pregnancy. That was another pregnancy burp.
Oh, right. Nice.
Yeah, you're welcome. So many of those. If there's not some bodily function every episode, I don't feel good about myself. So I was so distracted by my own burp. I don't remember what I was talking about. So Mary Magdalene,
you're talking about everybody
Greco-Roman
loved Greek.
culture.
You're
So everybody loved Greece, right?
Yeah.
Alexander the Great. They wanted to perpetuate Greek culture.
Yeah.
This was the structure of Greek culture. This is the place women had in Greek culture. Mm-hmm. Then you've got so Rome, they even sent emissaries. They went to study Greek culture. And if you do some side-by-side comparisons of Greek literature and Roman literature, Greek poetry and Roman poetry, there's all this symmetry, and finally Rome gains power and sort of subjugates Greece. But Greece doesn't go away or anything. They're still doing their thing and running their culture their way.
They still are right now.
Yeah, they're still they're still kicking it, right? Yep. They're still doing the damn thing, as they say.
They are.
So it's not they went away, but you have these you have all this. So this is this melting pot of culture, and then you have Mary of Magdala, who's a Jewish woman who has finances. There's no mention of husband or children of any kind, and she's in a position both to be a spiritual deacon, a leader within the Christ movement, also from a place of personal experience because she's been delivered personally. And her commitment level to the ministry of Jesus and the message of Jesus is proportional to her level of healing, which was great. But she must have had money. So I imagine that Mary was likely, maybe like Penelope.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe she had gotten married at a young age. Sprat, this little sprat fish, which was a hugely important export because you got to think about it. Jews couldn't eat a whole heck of a lot. They had a lot of dietary restrictions, but fish wasn't one of them.
Yeah.
And so here you have the Sea of Galilee. It's rich with this very particular fish that just happens to be kosher, embedded in northern Israel. And so she likely, if that was the main export and that's what she was doing with her life, and she had enough money and finances to be a financial supporter, she probably was a head of household. Maybe her husband had died. Maybe her husband was much older than her, which was not uncommon. Women got married as soon as they had their periods, you know?
Yes.
So maybe her husband was much older. Maybe her children had moved on. Maybe her children were died. Maybe she never had any kids.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up something when you were just saying that, because what is the symbol of Christianity?
The fish.
Now, according to this, Magdala, where she came from,
Mhm.
Magdala Nunaya, it means tower,
Mm-hmm.
but in the Babylonian Talmud, it means tower of the fishes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting that that was her nickname. So she must have had a prominent attachment to
had to
Magdala.
have.
She
She
had
had
to.
to
Is
have.
it Magdala?
She had that big fish money.
She had that big fish money. She would have gangster fish money.
Big
And you know what?
fishing,
And
catching
again-
the G's. I don't know.
And thinking about thinking about her 7 demons.
Yes.
And thinking about the 6th thing God hates, 7 that are detestable to him, right? They're issues of character that we often find most relevant in situations where money and power are an issue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, lying, bearing false witness, those are the 6 things that God hates, 7 that are detestable to him: a lying tongue, haughty eyes, right? So it's possible that the picture to me that's emerging here is of a woman who had significant financial contributions, had significant power. She was not. She went no slouch because she wouldn't have been in charge of all the women. The fact that she's mentioned so many times and the fact that she's always the first in a list of women means that she was in charge of them. She was in charge of the troop of women. Right. Much like how Phoebe was in charge of disseminating Paul's letter, Mary was in charge of the women in Jesus's ministry, which means that she had an elevated place of importance in the ministry.
Yeah.
She had money. She had been delivered of the cares of this world, and she was now willing to expend all of that money in service of the message of the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that, and this is also, to me, in her level of spiritual importance is indicated by the Gospel of Mary, which so for those of you that don't know, the Gospel of Mary is an apocryphal reading. And I'm just going to I wrote a thing down.
While you're looking at that, can I bring up something real quick?
No?
Pretty please. Something that I was thinking
She
of.
said no means no, Rick.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
You know, when we read the Gospels, every one of them have this eyewitness account of the crucifixion,
Mm-hmm.
but none of the disciples were there. So the only way that they could have ever gotten the crucifixion eyewitness account would have had to have been from either Mary Magdalene or Mary, the mother of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the only way they would get an eyewitness account. There are no others
Right.
around there.
Yeah.
Except for the disciple whom Jesus loved in
Yeah.
John. So there's that guy's there. So
Yeah.
that means that these women are most likely the ones that gave us the eyewitness accounts.
Yeah, they had to
Wow.
have been.
And it had to have
And-
come from Mary Magdalene.
And given the fact that in general in Jewish culture, not necessarily in Jewish religious circles, right? Because there's an influence between American culture and American Christianity, but not all the rules cross,
right.
right?
Mhm.
So in Jewish culture, maybe women were not considered worthy of testimony. They were so low on the totem pole, but we have evidences of Jewish women having prominent places as priestesses in the movement. Obviously, these women were so highly honored and revered and recognized as significant in the movement that their word was good enough.
Yes. Yes.
It didn't need to be verified, which, okay, so this is interesting. So, okay, background, Gospel of Mary. In 1986, a German scholar named Karl Reinhardt purchases this codex from a manuscript dealer in Cairo. Now, a codex is the precursor to our modern book. It used to be that they would take papyrus and flatten it out and make scrolls. At some point, they started being like, this is super annoying.
Uh-huh.
we should like make this easier to read. So they started cutting it into sheets and binding it together. And they would cut it into like specific numbers and then usually bind it with leather. So that's called a codex. It's just a book.
Proto book.
It's a proto book. But when we find a codex, it helps us date it. So we kind of know about when people stopped using scrolls and started using codices. So anyway, the codices is the plural of codex. So he purchases this codex, which we now call the Berlin Codex, just from some dude, some random guy. And inside this thing, it's from like the 5th century. He finds the Gospel of Mary, the Apocryphon of John, the Sophia of Jesus Christ, and the Acts of Peter. At that point, those are all previously unknown.
That's amazing. I didn't realize that was in the 80s.
I think they were mentioned.
1896.
Weren't they mentioned
Oh,
by?
18. Okay.
I thought Irenaeus had mentioned them in his heresies.
Well, this is.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
It's possible that maybe, but this is like up until now, like so the book that I have, the Gospel of Mary of Magdala, Jesus and the First Women Apostle, like this is it's what we have. It's all the pictures of the works that we have, and it's the basic background of where the book came from. So up until that point, they hadn't been
okay.
So maybe they and this is from
maybe
the 5th
somebody
century.
mentioned their existence historically,
but they never
with the
found
book
them.
themselves. Yeah,
Yeah.
That's where I was at. Is that they were known that they were out there, but they never found a copy.
And which is interesting is like, so, you know, that Nag Hammadi is one of the bigger excavations that they found, you know, like,
Village and all that.
Yeah.
Dead Sea
Later
Scrolls.
on. And that's like in like 1947. Now, when they excavated all of that, they also found copies of the Sophia of Jesus and the Apocryphon of John and the Acts of Peter as well, so that they confirms that these were important books because stuff didn't get copied. Y'all, making paper was a super pain in the butt.
Yes, it was.
It was not something like that you just did on a Saturday. Like it was a big deal. So by the time something got written down, like it was important.
Right.
And a lot of times we can date pieces of scripture because they also recycled it. Like they didn't throw anything away. So like we'll like be reading a piece of the gospel and then on the back of it, it's like an old legal document from Rome. And it will say when so-and-so was the emperor, we did this. And so now we can date that actual chunk of scripture that was written on because it was written on an old piece of recycled legal documentation that some Christian like stole and was using to keep a track of the
because that's how valuable paper was.
Because that's how valuable paper was and how hard it was to come by.
Right.
And it's one of the ways that we can date things. So they found several copies of that, but there was not a copy of the Gospel of Mary. So this guy has this Berlin Codex. He's like, this is amazing. He starts to translate it, and then like all hell breaks loose. Like World War I happens. There's like a pipe busts in the room where he's trying to like do all this work and everything gets wet. It's like it's a whole mess. Meanwhile, so while this is all going on, he's trying to translate it. In 1917, another fragment of the Gospel of Mary is discovered in Egypt. This one is written in Greek. The Berlin Codex is written in Coptic, which of course is Egyptian, and it's the final iteration of the language of Egypt.
Yeah.
So that also helps us date things because like we all know like the hieroglyphs because we've all seen like the Prince of Egypt and they wrote these little pictures. There was an evolution to the written language of Egypt, and its final kind of iteration was Coptic, and it was really used by early Christians to record things. Anyway, this Berlin Codex is in Coptic. This fragment in 1917 is Greek, and then another one shows up. Another piece of the puzzle shows up in 1983. A third fragment of the Gospel of Mary is found, and all three chunks are contained in this book, and all three of them pretty much line up. The challenge with the Berlin Codex is it was like in immaculate condition from being from the 5th century and not being discovered. So 5th century is between 400 and 500 CE.
Right.
I don't know how much everyone knows. I find that I might be over-explaining things, but I never know like who's listening and who knows what. So
I think it's
over-explain. It's better.
Yeah, over-explain. Okay. So the book's in perfect condition, and all the other books that are contained in the Berlin Codex are all complete. However, they've all been shuffled around, and the only pages missing are like pages like 2 through 9 of the Gospel of Mary. Then there's a chunk that remains, and then chunks and then the last little pit is gone too. So it's like the only pieces that were actually removed are the pieces that are most relevant to her specific gospel.
Oh, really? Has any of that ever been found?
No.
Oh, that's
So
a big bummer.
the fragments that we have found support the pieces that we already have.
Yeah.
And they all line up. There's no significant differences, which again attests to the importance of the Gospel of Mary for the early Christian movement because they copied it properly. They copied it well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Somebody didn't like it.
somebody didn't want that story to be told.
Yeah.
Oh,
Somebody
that's
tore
a
some papers
genuine
out.
disappointment. I wonder if we'll ever find that.
Probably.
You know, I hope. I don't know. It would be wonderful if we could find a full copy of her gospel. Now,
It's in the
chances
basement of the Vatican
It's in
with
a-
many other things.
That's what I was getting ready to say.
Yeah.
It's in the catacombs.
Yeah.
it was likely written in the 3rd century, right? So it probably wasn't written it was written long after she was dead,
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
right? Like a lot of these apocryphal works.
Sure.
But it's possible that it was based on a teaching of hers that had circulated. Like she was still considered a prominent figure. But here's what's interesting about the Gospel of Mary. Jesus is dead. He's appeared to the disciples. He says a bunch of Jesus-y things that are like normal things Jesus would say, right?
Consistent.
Consistent with Jesus, right? Like he's like, if someone says to you, he's over here, don't listen to them, don't add anything, don't become promulgators of the law. It's interesting because they don't translate Son of Man, they translate it Son of Humanity.
Yeah.
Or Child of Humanity, but it's like whatever, Son of Man, Child of Humanity, it's fucking apples and oranges. It's potato, it's the same. But so he says a bunch of stuff that's like, on brand for Jesus. And then he disappears. And all the disciples are super bummed. And Mary is not. Mary is unwavering. Mary's like, chill out, y'all. It's going to be fine. And then,
Which makes sense when you
which is
consider
great.
she'd already been taught how to touch me not.
yeah. So then Peter stands up and says, this is in chapter 6, verses 1-2. Peter stands up and says, sister, we know that the Savior loved you more than all other women. Tell us the words of the Savior that you remember, the things which you know that we couldn't because we haven't heard them.
I know what's coming.
What?
Keep going.
So then, and then the next pages are missing.
That's what I knew was
Oh
coming.
my
Like,
God.
tell us,
Yeah.
a
That's
wise
so
woman.
brutal.
And then
It's
it's
so
like,
brutal. It's
Oh.
so brutal. It's so brutal.
That is massively disappointing.
in the
It is, it's awful.
audiobook, when it gets to that, it goes, shh.
Yeah. So that's my saying.
Just kidding.
So but what happens is she launches into this vision, and these are pages 9-11. 9-11 are missing, which is the bulk of the teaching. But we can pick up on page 12, and what she's talking about is the ascension of the soul, fighting powers. So the soul has to defeat certain powers on its way to becoming perfected. So and again, nothing in there is like totally different from what we always see. Like the soul is perfected. We're constantly moving from glory to glory as we learn how to defeat sin on deeper levels.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is the fourth, so she goes through the fourth power. The fourth power has 7 stages that it needs to the 7 things that it needs to defeat.
Yeah.
And so that's like,
That makes sense, doesn't it? Considering she had 7 demons removed.
well,
Yeah.
and that's what's really interesting. So it's like, so when the soul had brought the 3rd power to naught, the 3rd power is desire. It went upward and saw the 4th power, and it had 7 forms. The 7 forms are darkness, desire, ignorance, the zeal for death, the realm of the flesh, the wisdom of the flesh, and a wrathful person. These are the 7 powers of wrath. So for me, Mary's description of 7 powers that the soul must defeat in order to be whole. And they are the kinds of things that a wealthy fish gangster woman would have had to defeat as she climbed the ladder of the fish empire in 1st century Magdala.
Mm-hmm.
The things that she would have had to have been delivered from, because there are things that would have been essential to her economic survival in a kingdom that required women to be shrewd economic managers.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
This woman describes, I think she's describing the process of her own exorcism. And this is a special vision that she has.
Man, that is excellent.
That's related to a teaching that Jesus gave her personally. And then it's super fascinating because when she's done, Peter's like, shut up.
I know.
Peter's like, shut up and sit down. You don't know anything. And she starts crying. She's like, why would I make this up? Why would I do that? You asked me for comfort. You said, tell us something that Jesus didn't tell us. I did. And now you're like, yelling at me. And then I think it's Andrew that stands up and is like, you know what? You know he said stuff to her that he didn't say to us. Quit being a jerk.
Yeah.
And then that's the end of the book.
Yeah.
Wow.
So even amongst the works attributed to her, we see the culturally embedded misogyny that would desire to strip her of her relevance in the Jesus movement, even as
I would say that it's being addressed. Although in a short version, it's literally being addressed in the work.
Exactly. Even as she's being honored and venerated for her unique knowledge, she's being attacked and accused of it. So we have several things. We have a culture that put women in charge of households, which were tiny economies, which gave them access to money and influence. We have a culture that in Rome that had a patronage system that put people at the top paying the way of people at the bottom. There was a tit for tat relationship involved, which is one of the reasons why I think Paul kind of goes out of his way to make a whole paragraph thanking Phoebe for everything she's done, you know?
Yeah.
Right.
Because these women had that level of power, they could make or break you with their financial support.
Yeah.
Again, this isn't like you could just go to Ingalls and get a job bagging on the side. No. You couldn't just like decide to pick up second shift. It's not how it worked.
Right.
So these women were powerful enough that they needed this level of recognition, that these men were willing to give them this level of recognition. Also, I think that there's humility in the early Christian community. There's a true love, right? But 28 people get thanked. 10 of them are chicks. Yep. And most of them weren't attached to a dude.
Yeah.
Single women.
Yeah.
So we have all of that going on. And then we have the fact that this religion is sort of sequestered away at the beginning and has to be run in homes that were run by women. The fact that Mary's reputation, the fact that it shifts in that 6th century, in the Middle Ages, right? From this mystic woman who had special knowledge to this example of like lascivious, indulgent, sexually promiscuous, thing. It's the evolution of Christianity from a oppressed movement that was supported by women who ran houses to a prominent political tool to control the empire. When you see that shift in the opinion of Mary, what you're seeing is the shift in culture from now we want to line ourselves up with the misogynistic and patriarchal culture of the day, which was because now men ran the political. Again, women oikos, men polis. So we had to remove women from those positions of power and authority because now the church was meeting in public. The church became a public space.
Became a political space.
It became a political space.
Yeah.
Yeah, that computes. Right?
It does.
If your mic wasn't so expensive, I would drop it.
Oh my gosh. That was awesome.
And that's the end of it. But that's it.
That was awesome. Yeah, great job.
So how do you which is awesome, but do you when I first met you, you talked about how much you loved Mary Magdalene. You went and visited a basilica or a church or something?
I did. What's cool about what's kind of cool about traveling, and it's like so stupid. It's like when I was like traveling in Spain. So like,
she's a process theologian.
Yeah, I was like kind of a process theologian that like traveled through Spain. When I was like at this tiny little basilica in France, like it makes me sound like such a jerk. I hiked the Camino de Santiago when I graduated from college in 2019. It is a super old trail that legend goes was walked by John as he was preaching his gospel in and throughout Spain. So it starts on the border of France and Spain, which is where the mountains are, the Great Pyrenees Mountains. And then it goes all across the top of Spain, and it ends in Santiago de Compostela on the coast. So you hike through.
I can barely hear it at that speed.
Yeah.
Santiago de Compostela.
Santiago
So,
de Compostela.
yeah.
Hey, I did it.
Yeah. So I was hiking that. It's not glamorous. You sleep in hostels full of like snoring dudes that smell like wet corn chips because everybody's hiking like 10 to 15 miles a day with like backpacks and stuff. Like, you're just like cobbling together meals out of whatever everybody happens to have in their backpack in like the communal kitchen. My flip-flops got stolen. I'm telling you, like, it's not as glamorous as it sounds, but it was awesome.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's cool about being in a lot of these old churches is the relics and the way that, like, when I was in Cuenca and they had this particular day, Maria de la Luz, Mary of the Light, they were having this Maria de la Luz ceremony, and they pull out this like massive statue that's carried through town decorated in flowers, and that Mary and Jesus are black. They're black because why wouldn't they be?
I mean, they're definitely not white.
Right. And like they're made of dark wood. They're carved out of dark wood.
Sure.
And so like you see all these, and like they really venerated women. Like the Catholic, like for some reason, the more ancient churches, that were like have these establishments from like before things got all like icky.
Yeah.
They're really, really, really old. They have a lot of that stuff in there. Like, so yeah, so I did, I got it. There's a Mary Magdalene. There was a church, there's several churches erected to several people, like stopped in basilicas that were erected for John the Baptist, but I stopped into a basilica that was erected for Mary Magdalene, and it was closed.
Oh.
And I was so upset because I had like rerouted my entire day to like go through this one particular town to be able to stop at this particular church, and it was closed. And so I wound up just like sitting. And what's interesting too is that in Spain, in order to get there to that church, I had to hike it's called the Calzada Romana, and it's the oldest stretch of Roman road still in existence in Spain.
That's really neat.
awesome.
It's like the original. So like this old AF church on this old AF path. Like I was like walking the original Roman road, like, and parked myself at her church, and then just like, wasn't able to go in, but I could just, I don't know, I could feel, I don't know, man. That's what makes me kind of like almost heretical. I could feel her.
Yeah.
I could feel her.
It makes you almost heretical because you feel like I thought you were surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses that she was one of your witnesses.
Oh, she is. That's
so
what I'm
that's
saying.
not heretical.
Well, that's what I think, I think she was there, and she just felt, I could just tell that I was in the presence of like a bad bitch. I could just tell.
Yeah.
I could just feel it.
No, that was heretical.
Yeah. I could just feel it, and I just felt it, and I just imagined myself like what it would be like to be like, one of her disciples. In that moment, in a weird way, I felt like I was one of her disciples. I felt like I felt like I was one of her disciples. Not just, obviously Jesus is in charge of all of us, right? Like, duh. But some people really like Paul. Some people really like Peter. Some people really like, different characters in the Bible that they just really, that's kind of whose life they, and people really love David. I just really love Mary Magdalene. And in that moment, I felt her, and I was like,
so tradition,
they don't get you.
Tradition
They don't
goes,
get you.
Tradition goes is that she traveled with John, with the Apostle John. That was tradition, is that she traveled with him. I think that there's a good reason to believe that that's very feasible. I think that she probably did. She ended up going to Turkey, but that custom of that John was in Spain is what really brings Mary to Spain, is because Mary was with John. Okay. Now here's something interesting. If it is John, in the Gospel of John, where you hear about Mary, and this is going to take me literally 20 seconds, okay? When you hear about Mary getting the first, like, eyewitness, there's Jesus resurrected. There is something mentioned earlier, right before that, wherever the disciple whom Jesus, or it wasn't the disciple whom Jesus loved, it was that other disciple at this point who was with Peter, goes into the tomb and sees the napkin, and it says, and then he believed. So, I said earlier about how she was the actual first embodiment of the church. John, they believe that was John. I say Lazarus, but let's say it's John. John believes while he's in the tomb. Mary sees him and believes. So it kind of unites those two together in church history. They take Mary Magdalene and John and they sort of keep them together for the rest of their lives. And eventually she dies and is buried in Turkey.
Oh.
Yep.
That's interesting. Which we have no way of knowing if that really happened.
That's
but
what
those are
that's
just
tradition.
Like, yeah, that's tradition. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
So anyway.
That's great.
That's all I got for you, man.
All right.
Well, y'all, this was a great episode. This was
was.
a lot of fun.
That was fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Feel free to, those of you that have the means, become patronages.
Oh, yeah.
Patrons
Do we have,
of
do
the
we have,
Bros of Berea.
I think we have a thank you, correct? I mean, I don't know that we have a name for it, but there's a thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody that did something very nice for you.
Yeah. It makes me feel so special. One of our lovely Patreon members maybe must have been, or somebody who listens to this podcast.
Yep.
Gave me a gift, gave me some money, which is amazing because I'm like about
From
to have a
one
second
mom
baby
to
and can't
another.
work. I know that made me feel really seen. I know that's a thing that we say now, but it means something, because I struggle a lot being kind of stuck at home with these kids and trying to like keep my identity and still feel like I matter somehow outside of the realm of just like washing diapers and like making dinner.
Yeah.
And
which is an incredibly important ministry. Keep
which is
doing
incredibly important ministry, and I'm not mad about it, but it's like, I struggle to remember that there's more to me than that, And
Yeah.
so that just
When you
made me
start
feel really
wiping
seen.
my butt in public, it's a problem, right?
Is it a problem or is it a performance? I mean, we
boy.
could put a tip hat out. I don't know
I
if
think
you've
you're
been to
going to get
downtown
less that
Asheville.
way.
Yeah. I don't know if you've been to downtown Asheville and seen some of the street performers, but I mean, I think me wiping your butt in public might surpass some of them.
Yeah. It could be an upgrade over a couple of them. It's fair. That's terrible, but that doesn't make it untrue just because
funny.
it's terrible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that wraps it up.
That was
I gotta
great.
admit, so we've wrapped up the Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
You did a great job as host. I'm
Thanks.
so excited. I'm so glad.
This was my first time doing anything even like hosty.
Oh, you
Which
killed
is
it.
nice
You
because
killed it.
most of the time
Yeah.
I'm just constantly interrupting you. Most of the time I'm like, wait until
That's honestly, that's good too.
I gotta
Whatever.
admit, as I was sitting here, I was feeling it. I was like, I could feel it. Like you were controlling it, and I could feel that. And then I was like, I felt that, the feeling when you're trying to run the show. I was able to take a breath and just relax and know that you had it. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Well, what might be fun for Notes of the Underground in the future, because we're going to take a break now. We'll come back in January.
That's right.
I'm going to push out a kid, you
Yep.
know,
Yep.
and that's gonna take me a minute to recover from.
Yeah, it'll be a little
And
busy.
and for the $250 donation, we will give you a video of that on our Patreon page.
Yeah, no. First of all, I don't know if you've been a part of a birth. Nobody want to see that. I'm telling you right now.
I have been.
I mean, I told Dylan. I
I
remember
was in one. I was a part of a birth, and then I also watched some. Yeah.
and doing it a second time is so different, right? Like the first time, I talked about this where like the first time, we're like, let's pack our niece pillows and like made a little playlist, and don't forget to bring the like Wonder Boom so I can listen to my playlist,
Yeah.
And then like it gets there, and I was like, turn it off, turn it off. And like I told Dylan, I told my husband, and we was living in Siena at the time. We weren't married yet, but I was like, listen, don't bring my good pillow with like the brand new white pillowcases with the little red birds on it that I got from IKEA. Just bring bring a comfy pillow, but bring like a crappy one, And sweet man, when time came, was so panicky. What did he do? He grabbed my white pillow, and so I give birth, no drugs, totally natural. It was metal. And I'm like cleaning everything up. We're like, doing it. And Dylan just looks at me, and he's got this look on his face like, ugh, like he knows how much trouble he's about to be in. Right. And all he does is just like lift the pillow up from the floor. And it kind of looks like it's been in that scene in Carrie at the end. And I'm like, that pillow's a goner.
Yeah.
That pillow's a goner.
I must tell you, because you've said this to me before, and it was burned into my memory. You birthed that child like crouch standing, right?
Yeah, I squatted her.
Metal.
Squatted her in the world.
Metal.
Except that her shoulder got stuck. And so then I had to like quickly, it's called a shoulder dystocia. So it's normal, like, especially with your first pregnancy. So I had to like flip over, and like, then, doctor's like, Dylan, grab her leg, like they're like maneuvering. Baby squirted out like a grease pig. It was good. But yeah, most of it I did. I just like held on to the back of the bed and squatted down like my old Native American ancestors and just pushed that baby out. If I'd had a papoose, I'd have just wrapped her up and kept gathering corn or whatever.
Just walked on up and just kept doing the crops.
So just to recap, we will not be posting that on the Patreon.
Okay, yeah,
but we are
good.
going to take a break from the podcast, right? We're going to take a break until
We
January.
won't be back until January.
So I mean, personally, for me, I'm amenable to suggestions. What I would like to do next is a deep dive on Jesus and sex work. And I would like to look at, what did sex work look like in the Bible, and what was Jesus's, and what our attitude as Christians now should be regarding sex work. That would be fun. But if any of our listeners have a specific thing they might like to hear more about too,
yeah.
maybe they could make a suggestion for Notes from the Underground.
They could.
You know?
I'm sure
I'm all about sex work. I mean, as a subject or a topic. Awesome.
Well, you know what they say:
Enough
do what you
jokes
love,
for
and you
Ray.
never work a day in your life.
It's like Anthony Jeselnik, and I'm done. He did a good job.
All right. Thanks again.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
Cooked his dinners and rubbed his back. Like, what does that mean? Because if you look at the word, it's the same word used to describe deacon, a person who was in charge of helping out running the service. So it's likely that these women weren't just like doing women's work. They were supporting when they say supporting his ministry.
I think that they were making him fish sandwiches all day.
Sure. Sprat, apparently. That's the name of the fish that they fished in Magdala. Sprat.
Yeah. What was it?
Sprat.
Sprat.
It was a little salty, boneless fish. Boneless? Yeah. I looked it up. Let me find it. I have 6 pages of notes on
It's like
this.
a sardine, bro.
Yeah.
It's literally a sardine.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
That's why have you ever had a kippered beef snack?
Sprat fish, which is this little 6-inch long fish that could be dried and exported.
Yep.
It's a booming
just
business in the region.
Sardine.
It's a sardine.
Not a boneless fish, but like, yeah, a little tiny sardine.
Kippered.
Probably not boneless, but just
The bones don't matter.
The bones are like, almost cartilagey, like some little fish are. You can just eat them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you don't have to debone them.
Yep.
We're rolling.
Oh, we're rolling.
Yeah.
Rolling. Keep them doggies rolling.
Yeah, I found this really interesting website that had like a whole outline of like the 3 years of his ministry. And he went up to Capernaum at some point. John 2:2. After this, he and his mother and brothers, after turning the water into wine, went up to Capernaum and stayed there only a few days. Then travels back down to Jerusalem for Passover. Then makes his way back up, reaching Galilee in the first year of his ministry. But in the second year of his ministry, after he gets chased out of Nazareth, that's when he gets chased out of Nazareth.
Yeah.
That's when he actually like moves to Capernaum and like starts his ministry there.
Yeah.
And
up
so
towards Samaria, actually.
Yeah.
He
So at
does
that
a lot
point-
at the well. Remember the woman at the well?
Yeah.
That's
So then the
Samaria.
question becomes like, so did Mary hear of him when he first went to Capernaum? And like, was she healed of him? Like, it's just hard to say. But like, because he'd kind of been chilling in that general like area, before he went down and then came back up, and then settled there. The second and third year of his ministry was like all in that little area.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say, like, at what point, did she become a part of the posse?
Yeah.
Yeah. But in any case,